Everyone, it is Mr. Lynn, and today I want to do something different, and we are going to play a little game of What's That Symbol? So I was practicing a little bit recently. If you saw, I did a live stream concert. Maybe I'll upload that at some point. But in that live stream concert, I came across the double sharp symbol, and that's not something that's completely uncommon, but it made me think that there might be some stuff that you guys might get tripped up on when you see it. So I found this great website that's got all kinds of different musical symbols on it, and I think we are just going to go down the page and play What's That Symbol? So let's start right here in the middle of the page. We can see a bunch of different clefs. You guys probably know the treble clef and the bass clef. Some of you should know the C clef as well. Call that the alto or tenor clef, right? Technically, there are all kinds of different clefs, and there's a name for each one depending on where it's positioned. We like to use, or I like to call, the bass clef the F clef, and the reason is in between those two dots, whatever note is in between those two dots is F, and that's the F below middle C. Technically, they can move it, as you can see there with the sub bass and baritone clefs. That can be moved, but the bottom line is whatever line is in between those two dots, that is the F below middle C. Now, the treble clef is technically called the G clef, and you see wherever that little loop circles there, that's going to be the G above middle C. All right, so you can see technically if they put that on the bottom line there, that's called the French clef. Then really that can be moved anywhere, just like the F clef can be moved anywhere. Then we've got the C clef, which can be called the alto clef, the tenor clef, the soprano clef, the baritone clef, the mezzo soprano clef. The bottom line is wherever that middle thing is pointing, that kind of arrow part of the clef, that is pointing to middle C. Okay? So moving on, you see this next one here. That's an old style C clef, not used anymore, but you can kind of see how that evolved into the modern C clef. This is a weird G clef that was used by Puccini. Over here, this is another version of a C clef that some people used. You're not going to see those. These you might see. Notice these, the little 8 above or below the clef here for the G clef and the F clef. What that's telling you is it is read like that clef, just an octave up or down. So if you've got that 8 above the G clef here, you're looking at treble clef. It's just everything is an octave up. Okay, so in this case, this loop is not going to be going around G above middle C. That's going to be going around G an octave above middle C. Okay, same thing here with that 8 below the clef. That's everything an octave down. This weird boxing, this is another clef symbol. The percussionists are going to be used to it. This is just a percussion clef. It's for non-pitched percussion. Let's see, some of the elements of a musical score. You should know all that stuff. The C, this is common time or 4/4 time. You guys should be familiar with this. The C with a slash, that is cut time or 2/2 time. If you don't understand those time signatures, go back to my video on time signatures. This is kind of important here. The aspects of a note. The main dot or circle of the note, that's called the head of the note. The stick coming off of that note is called the stem. And if there's the little loopies like on an 8th note or a 16th note or 32nd note or whatever, those are called flags. Now if you take those flags and loop them together into one like this, that's called a beam. When you're looking at this next thing here, this is something only string players should be seeing. What's happening here is it wants you to play this D, but both on an open string and on another string. So it wants you to do 2 Ds at the same time. It wants the exact same note. Obviously, most instruments can't do that. the Spretzgangsong stem. I don't know what that is. This is new to me. Apparently, Schulenburg used it to indicate that something was supposed to be like speak sung, not quite sung. All right, interesting thing here. So we are used to these American names for the notes, right? But as you can see, not everybody calls it the same thing. If you ever end up working with the British conductors that come over and work with the Liberty alumni band, sometimes you might hear some of these English terms, right? So you can see we Americans call this a whole note. They call it a semibrev. You remember when I taught you all the note names, I called this double whole note a brev. That's what I was taught it was called, right? Half note, the British called it a minim. Quarter note, the British called it a crotchet. Eighth note, the British call it a quaver. 16th notes, they call it a semi-quaver. 32nd note, a demi-semi-quaver. This seems really complicated, but there are people who do use this. This is used. I have heard, listening to some of the two-set violins, that they reference quavers and semi-quavers and demi-semi-quavers and hemi-demi-semi-quavers. But those aren't terms that we use. And over here you can see these rests as well. The rests, how they line up. Notice here with the quarter note rest, the quarter rest. Notice this is something we don't see much. It looks like a backwards eighth rest. That is a quarter rest. We don't see that much anymore, but it exists. And you can see how the notes just keep going smaller and smaller. We know the multiple measure rest. You should know this. Whatever this is, you see this long bar and the number above it. You are counting that number of measures. Okay, that's what that means. And there are some other systems for that as well that have also faded to time, but you do see every once in a while. Note head shapes. Generally speaking, if you see any of these instead of the dot as the head of a note, you need to look up what that's telling you to do. Generally speaking, there'll be something in the score that's going to tell you what that is indicating. It's not really something I'm overly familiar with, but yeah, generally speaking, it's telling you to do something different. You just got to look that up. If you see an X as the head of a note, percussionists see this a lot. Generally speaking, that is just telling you, it's telling you, again, you're not going to be just playing it as normal. It might be a ghosted note, or it might be a non-pitched note, or if you're looking at vocal music, it might be something that is supposed to be spoken instead of sung. So that's a little X as a head. Geez, these are two things I haven't seen since college. They're both German notations, and it's telling you about the part. Generally, it's telling you how important the part is. The primary part or voice would be the H, and the N with the little line there, that's the secondary. These are important. The 8VA, 8VB. 8VA means you're playing it an octave up. 8VB, octava bassa, means you're playing that an octave down. These next two, they're stuff. You're never going to see those. But it's 2 octaves there. I've never seen that. But that's what that's telling you. 2 octaves up, 2 octaves down. You know the backwards repeat and the forward repeat, right? If you see the forward repeat, this regular second repeat here, you're going all the way back to the beginning, unless you see the backwards repeat. That's where you go back to first and second ending. Or really, this can be as many as you want, but this is telling you how many times to repeat that section. There's your first and second ending that we're used to seeing. Over here, these dotted lines, that's showing, this is kind of important. Looking at the slashes, right? That's showing you, if you see a quarter note with Can I zoom in? There we go. If we see the quarter note with a slash on the stem, that's telling you to cut it in half. So you're going to be playing 2/8 notes. If you see a quarter note with 2 slashes, you're playing 4/16 notes. A quarter note with 3 slashes. The slashes are just telling you how many to split it up into, right? So if you look over here at this dotted quarter note with a single slash, you're splitting that up into 1/8 notes, okay? It's telling you how many to split it up for. And you can do that with stack notes as well. Okay, this is cool. The 2 lines going between those 2 notes there. That is telling you to trill between those 2 notes, or tremolo. Again, woodwind players are probably used to seeing this. Brass players, we don't usually see it much. There's definite rules as to how we trill, and those rules change depending on when the music was written. But like I said, if you see 2 notes with these thick double bars going between them, that is telling you to trill between those 2 notes. This is measure repeats, okay? So if you see this first one here, that is telling you to repeat the previous measure. The second one, where you've got the 2 slashes, that's telling you to repeat the last 2 measures, etc. DC, that means go back to the beginning, del kappa. That fancy sign there, that is a senye. So when you see a DS, you are supposed to go back to that sign right there. That's a sign. Yep, and there's the example of it. DC al fine, you go back to the beginning and stop at the fine. There's the fine. Not fine, it's fine. Everything's in Italian. That little crosshair sign, that is the coda. Jazz people were especially used to seeing codas, right? Sometimes instead of DC or DS al fine, you'll see DC or DS al coda. That means where it says to coda, you're going to jump to that sign. Fermatas, I bet you didn't realize there was 3 different ways that can look. We're used to seeing the first one. Generally speaking, in modern American music, you're only going to see the first one, but the second 2 mean the same thing. Caesura, some people call that a railroad track, and they're wrong. This is a caesura. So this is a pause. You're going to stop all sound for that caesura, unless like something says hold through or whatever. But it's going to be a full stop of the full ensemble. Crescendo, we're used to that. That's gradually get louder. Crescendo from silence. You see that little dot or box there. This is something I don't think I've ever seen in music, but it's a cool concept. That means you're going to just start at the absolute quietest from silence and just make that sound happen. Decrescendo, we call it a swell. Really, it's just a crescendo and a decrescendo next to each other. Sharp we're used to, natural we're used to, flat we're used to. But also notice the little kind of fancy the double sharp is a little kind of fancy X there. And that's going to be moving it up a whole step or 2 half steps, okay? And we also have the double flat. Looks like 2 flats. That one makes more sense. Again, let's move it down 2 half steps. Let's get weird. So if we see a double sharp and they want to fully cancel out that double sharp, technically they have to put a double natural. If you see like a double flat and they only want to cancel half of that double flat, you need to do a natural flat. If they see a double sharp and they only want to cancel out half that double sharp, you need to see a natural sharp. Weird stuff, but it can happen. These are also weird. These are going semitones up and down. Okay, so this is taking it up half a half step and down half a half step, correcting that towards natural, adjusting it towards sharp. And some real out there modern music, they might use that. They don't want you to play either a B or a B flat. They want you to play in between those 2 notes, which you can technically do. Sometimes we do that accidentally. We call that being out of tune. But if the composer wants that, there's symbols for it. Here's some more specific ones. These little arrow ones that we were just looking at, I don't think composers really use those too much. These you do use because it is more precise. So I'm going to zoom in here. Hopefully the camera is doing what I want. You see this first one here. This is 3/4 of a tone flat. This one looks like a backwards flat sign. That's a quarter tone flat. This uh, kind of looks like a sharp, but only with one line going down. That's a quarter tone sharp. And then with 3 lines going down, 2 sideways, that's a 3/4 tone sharp. Yeah, cool stuff. I don't know what this next one is. That's kind of cool. What we got here? That's a different way to put a quarter tone sharp or a quarter tone flat. Haven't seen those before. Trill signs. This is kind of cool. So you can see what you got, the symbol above it and what it would be above, and you see underneath it the way it would be played. Again, if you see these kind of trills or the turns, okay, these different things, you really should look them up. Generally, you're only going to see these in solo playing, but if you see those kind of things, you really should look them up, especially for Bach. It was real specific on what ornaments he wanted, so that's what all those little symbols are doing. The really fast stuff is what it's indicating. You got to look that up. These are some things, we generally lump them into grace notes. It's just this little note added on there, and it shows kind of a notation of what it's trying to get you to do. Grace notes are tricky. You really got to kind of work them out and figure out exactly what you want to do there. Some more grace notes, and that's a turn right there. You can see how you would play it below. Never seen this next one. What is that? A symbol found above note heads. The bird fancier delight, which is explained in the original publication marks. Huh. Never seen that before. This is another kind of turn. Again, if you see it, look it up. I think it says here that Haydn used this in some of his piano music. TR, that's another indication for trill. We saw that above. Again, what's interesting about a trill is, depending on when the music was written, depends on if you're trilling up to a note or down to a note. And you might see like a natural sign or a sharp sign or a flat sign next to the trill. And that's telling you that generally when you're doing a trill, you're staying within the key. But if you see that accidental sign there, you're going to move outside of the key. Okay, so these are for piano, and those are indications of how you're supposed to play that stacked chord, whether you're supposed to play it all together or kind of roll through it. Piano and harp use those. Oh, ties. This is the musical plus sign. We see that back in book 1. Slur looks like a tie. The difference between a tie and a slur is that the notes are changing. For wind players, you're going to keep that wind going and you're not going to articulate between those notes. For string players, you're going to keep that bow going in the same direction. So it's a smoother transition between the notes. This is an optional slur. See that little slash there? It means you can or you can't. Again, generally that's something you only see in solo music. Triplet indications. We talked about triplets a little bit ago. Go back and watch that. Gliss, the trombone player's favorite thing. You're starting on one note and you're going all the way to the other one, and you want to slide through all the notes in between. Trombone players do this a lot. String players can do it pretty easy. Vocalists can do it as well. Most other instruments have a hard time doing this well, but other instruments do it. If you think of the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue, the clarinet is supposed to have a big, smooth gliss through there. It's very, very hard to do. Clarinet players, if you want a challenge, try and figure that out. This is the same idea. It's also showing you a gliss. Same idea. Also a fall. The big difference with this next kind of squiggly version of a gliss is it's not as specific as to which note it wants you to start or end at. An accent, you're going to put more weight on that note. This can be above or below a note. The dot placed above or below a note, that is staccato. Staccato does not mean short, it means separated, putting separation between those notes, not necessarily making it short. Dot after a note, however, that is adding half of what's in front of it. We talked about that in my video on note values. This is a staccatissimo. Yeah. This specifically is telling you to play the note for a quarter of the written length. Yeah, interesting. That's your marcato. Um, we don't usually see that. It's a different kind of accent. Again, we've got a staccato marcato. There we've got an accent with a staccato. The cap, we've seen that quite a bit. Next here we've got tenuto, that is stretching the note out. Okay, it's just a horizontal line again that can be placed above or below the note head. This is this is called the lore. String players know this. It's similar to the legato, but just a little bit of separation. Wind players, you're not normally going to see that. We know that. Real sharp hammered sound on that one. This is for these next two are for bowed instruments. This is the indication for a down bow or a pull. This is the indication. The next one, the V there, that is an indication for an up bow or a push. This is a cool one. If I'm correct, this is telling you to play as a harmonic. Again, that's for string players. Wind players, if you see this, you're probably looking at the wrong part or there's an error. Next one here, that is a natural harmonic. Again, that's specific for strings, and I honestly don't know how to do that. But string players, you should look that up. This is for also strings. This is a snap pizzicato. You didn't know there were so many different symbols, did you? This next one, this is telling strings to use a mute. Okay, you can see it kind of looks like a string mute there. This is, if you see the Roman numerals, that's probably telling you which part is supposed to be playing. If you see a plus above or below a note, that is probably telling a string player to do a pizzicato for just that note. Or you can see it in percussion parts, telling it to make like a dead sound, maybe by holding one stick on the head of the instrument. French horns might see it as well, indicating that is supposed to be stopped. So like you're supposed to really push your hand in there. In jazz, you might see that too. Horn players, when we're playing with like a plunger or a cup or a hat mute or something like that, that was going to be telling you to stop or cover the bell. If you're looking at like part writing, that's going to be telling you it's an augmented interval. And the circle here, little circle there, that's probably telling you it's a diminished interval. Or if it's a circle with a slash, that's a half diminished. If you see a triangle, that indicates that's a triad. That's, again, you're going to see that in music writing. What we got next? Oh, a little slash there. Again, this is in music writing. You're probably going to, this is indicating like in between letters. You might see like C-7. That's telling you to add the seventh into that chord. This is a weird one. This little smiley face here, that's indicating you are supposed to double tongue that. Not something I've ever seen. Generally speaking, as a wind player, and especially a brass player, we do double tongue quite a bit. But generally speaking, you just decide when it's the best to double tongue. Apparently this smiley face with an extra eye here, that's telling you to triple tongue. Never seen that. This is telling you to flutter tongue. That's like you're rolling your R's like that. Use the fingernails. I'm assuming that has to do either with percussion. Maybe you're supposed to use your fingernails on a drum, or maybe strings telling you to like pluck with specifically the fingernails. Never seen that one before. Damp all. Those are both for percussion, dampening. The comma. This is a breath mark. You'll see this above. More importantly than it being a breath mark is a phrasing mark, okay? When we're singing, it's very easy to keep phrasing in mind. When we're playing, we can sometimes forget about it. That little breath mark you shouldn't ignore. If there's a breath mark there, you should take it. I had a college professor who said breath marks are like cookies with a sign that says free cookies. If there's a sign that says free cookies, you take the cookie. Be rude not to. So the breath marks, you're supposed to take a breath. Metronome markings, you should know that. It means whatever is there, in this case a quarter note, that note equals that many beats per minute. Okay, so in this case it's telling you a quarter note equals 60 beats per minute. This next one you're seeing here, a certain kind of note equals another kind of note. Generally speaking, if you're like changing from 4/4 time to 6/8 time, this is telling you the relation between the beat and how that transition is supposed to be happening. These next two signs, these are for pianos and harps. That is telling you to use the sustain or engage the sustain pedal. Oh, what is this? Oh, okay. Then I'm not a piano player. That's why I don't know this. That is telling you to release the pedal. Interesting. Half pedal. Apparently that's a thing. There's some more pedal markings. More pedal markings. Slow release the pedal. Pedal, pedal. Fluttering the pedal. Apparently that's a thing. I'm learning so much today. Are you learning? Okay. Some more pedal markings. Chopin used. Organ markings. Look at all this stuff. What is all this? What we're looking at here, these are percussion indications as to what instrument you're supposed to play. Yes, that is an indication at the bottom for a pistol or a cannon. That happened. And last but not least down here, these are for mallet percussions. Again, this is real specific to mallet percussionists playing vibraphone or marimba. If you see these symbols there, look up what that means. It's telling you something very, very specific, but that is outside of my knowledge. So, did you learn something? I know I did. There are so many different symbols in music. Bottom line, though, is if you see something, if you see a symbol you don't recognize, you really should stop and take a minute to look it up. Try and figure it out. All right. Hope you learned something.